Right. So, hello again. I'm Sylvain Chamberlain. I've been a practicing Buddhist for over 27 years. Took my vows in 1988, and I wanted to I wanted to try to speak briefly today. Although, what's going to happen? This is a absolutely central concept in the Buddhist teaching that I want to talk about. It's the cycle of birth and death. And one can't study this without dealing with really the entirety of the Buddhist canon. There's still a lot of debate today amongst those who will have broadly read but adhere to only the early teachings of Buddha. All scripture, which I've talked about before, how the writings of Buddha, which are not really of Buddha, but his words recited repeatedly, put down into writing so that they could be held without corruption. We talk a lot about the correct transmission of the Buddha's teachings. That has a lot of implications. And as my friend Stephen Batchelor would say, and I recommend you listen to many of his videos on YouTube. I think there's some on this channel that you can find. I'll be adding more so that you don't just have my opinion. But the Buddha did exhort his disciples, his followers, to study broadly, because he understood that the more you studied Buddhist, non-Buddhist, secular science, whatever it was, that sooner or later, even if you came across some really wildly crazy ideas, that first of all you could identify them as wildly crazy because it didn't match with the world you experienced. And sooner or later, after more and more study and reading, you would come back to the essentials that he elucidated. So, in talking about the often used terms in the Pali Canon, the early teachings, about the cycle of birth and death, birth and rebirth, a theme that is constantly used to illustrate Buddha's vision of reality. If we only look at that transcription literally and only look at the early teachings, which in Mahayana and later teachings he starts to really unravel. But even so, even if you take the entire body of the Buddhists' works that can be attributed directly to Buddha, and there's always going to be argumentation about everything, but again, going back to the core Buddhist teaching is to study broadly so that at some point you transcend the words and you get the meaning, the intent, the understanding. This is part and parcel of awakening, being more aware, okay? It's not to take the words literally, but to understand what the words are trying to communicate. Buddha says over and over again that the true nature of Buddhahood, of enlightenment, it cannot be expressed in words. It can only be understood amongst Buddhas. And then he proceeds to teach us how to attain that enlightenment of being a Buddha. Buddha is a confusing word because it's used to identify the historical Buddha, Gautama, Siddhartha Gautama. But in the teachings, it really is a state of knowing, a state of being, a state of a life condition, probably the best words, if you already understand that life is not limited to this cycle of birth and death. That life contains everything. The universe says, where the universe comes from. That's very important. I know I just dropped it in there. But that the cycle of birth and death is something within the process of life. All right? And now I'm going to illustrate that for you in modern terms, because again, as Stephen Batchelors and others would point out, um, Buddhism is and this is why I identify it as not a religion, although Stephen doesn't have a problem with that term. But um, Buddhism is something that has constantly evolved, even during the Buddha's lifetime and his teaching career of some 50 years. Um, Buddha's teachings evolved. And the reason for that is that when you're teaching, you're dealing with different levels of knowledge, understanding, epistemology, if you want to look that word up, or you already know it. I don't mean to be condescending at all. Um, it's kind of like our public school system. We would not, we would be ill-advised as a society, given all the variations of the people that live within our society, to take a 6-year-old child and begin to teach them physics. Perhaps we could take physics down to a level where they would understand it. This often happens in kindergarten, for instance, when we make tubes and cones and try to fit circular, spherical things into square holes and all that. That is physics, actually. But I want you to understand, I'm talking about, things like solving calculus problems. It sounds ridiculous, right? Um, because in general, the 6-year-olds would just glaze or run away or be friend. They just wouldn't get it. Couldn't get it. They're just not developed enough. They don't have enough life experience to be able to begin to equate the concepts of calculus or even algebra. So we teach in steps. We teach a 6-year-old how to look at the world that a 6-year-old inherently understands, and then we push that. We try to bring that world a larger view. That 6-year-old, see the world you see? Well, look over here, look over here. And we keep doing that. And then we have elementary school because it's elemental concepts. And then we go to a junior high school, depending on your school system, what country you're in. And we slowly expand the mind, expand the mind, expand the mind, teach more and more. We don't know everything, we don't pretend to, but we know there's certain avenues you have to look in order to rediscover what you think you know in terms of a greater experience. This is how the Buddha taught. I mean, it's no mystery. So I would argue, and I will put to you, that the Pali Canon is filled, as all the teachings are, but especially in the early teachings, this reference to multiple lifetimes, rebirth, but it's important to remember that it started from the very beginning in the Four Truths, the liberation of the cycle of birth and death. He talks about birth and death as a cycle. Okay? This, 2,500 years ago, just to say that was enough to send you reeling. What? That it's a cycle? You mean, but it also fit in like a glove because everybody understood, yeah, I know I'm going to be reborn as, I just don't know if I'm going to be reborn as a rat or as a woman or as another man or blah, blah, blah. They were already caught up in the mysticism of a supernatural existence. And by that I mean what you observe in the world around you in your lifetime now is natural. That's what we call the natural world. We study the natural world. We investigate it all the way to the stars and the universe. It's natural, the natural sciences. If we postulate something we can't readily observe, we call it theoretical, right? So there's a division. So the Buddha was doing this. He was trying to expand from the natural world to a deeper understanding. Maybe I don't want to confuse you here. A deeper understanding that the natural world wasn't simply what was understood in the day, but there was actually a deeper, broader knowledge of that world that was, to them, supernatural. To us, it's not. To us, we understand the Big Bang and the end, the edges of the universe, and time travel, and the speed of light, and the immensity of the universe. We have a different concept of our world because that includes knowledge of that. What they would have called then supernatural, something beyond understanding. What we would have called then theoretical. So, I mean, it wasn't just in India. It was broadly considered. Even, I think, Pythagoras. Anyway, some Greek philosophers alluded to Lucretius. May even. Well, Lucretius took that apart. He was more Buddhist than he was Greek. About the idea that atoms are forever, conservation of matter, blah, blah, blah. But the idea, and please understand, I have to say at this point, I don't prepare any of these speeches. So I'm not reading some dogmatic thing that I composed really well. This is just from, I'm just spewing on a topic by virtue of my Buddhist practice and my study and my learning, what I believe I've come to know, and I'm sharing it with you. So it is my hope that by doing this, I don't impede my natural ability to make some slips, some errors of wording, or to repeat myself. I'm just going to accept that that's the way that I need to teach and communicate best the Buddhist teachings. It's the closest I can come to absolute honesty, at least in my mind. Okay, so I apologize if that's confusing at all. Back on track. This also includes, we talk about the cycle of birth and death. This also affects the oft assumption that Buddhists are atheists. That's problematic because an atheist is somebody who adheres to a knowledge that they're see, people say atheists don't believe in God. Well, that's atheists don't believe in theism. They don't believe in the idea of ordering one's life on the basis of supernatural things, like a god, like a creator god, like deities, and so forth. So in that sense, it wouldn't be entirely wrong to say that Buddhism is atheist. But I think that's also limiting, because to say you're an atheist means that your position is against theocracy. But Buddhism doesn't take that position. Buddhism simply takes the position that to believe in the cosmic spaghetti monster or any other kind of supernatural thing is actually detrimental to living a fully aware and truthful and honest life. That's a different thing altogether. It really, and if you look at any of the Buddhist writings, or all of them, you'll find that Buddha just avoids the conversation altogether. It's just like, it has no merit. It's a waste of time to go there. And in fact, it's worse than a waste of time. It's detrimental to your thinking, to your understanding of the real world and the process of life, of which you are precipitated. All right? Oftentimes, adherents to the earlier teachings who are stuck in this mode of birth and death and rebirth stay very stuck on the physical idea that I live and I die, and then rebirth must then occur after that death, which is this span of years that I have lived. What I want to drop on you today, and I realize I'm already going on 15 minutes here, so I'm going to wrap it up, because I'm going to talk about this over and over and over again. Here's the thought experiment I want to put in your head so that you begin to have a more modern view of what the Buddha's actual meaning was he was trying to open these minds to understand that the cycle of birth and death is happening moment to moment, not once I reach 90 and expire in this body and then come back in another body. That's supernatural, and Buddhism by its very nature cancels that out. That's not it. Study dependent origin, study impermanence, all the key areas of Buddhism. If you study them independently and then come back to the idea of rebirth, or what is the cycle of birth and death, you will come back with a different notion. This is not the idea of a soul. This is not the idea of some kind of container, permanent residence of your particular baggage, as some I've heard some Buddhist organizations call it. Your baggage of, for instance, my bag of Sylvain will come back in some other way. That's just so antithetical to all of Buddhist teachings. I don't understand how people who adhere to the Pali Canon in that way, because they don't all, but adhere to this notion of rebirth as this something that happens after a human lifetime, come back again. That's Hinduism, and it's throughout the early teachings, because Buddha was trying to access this idea that thinking was very, very limited and didn't understand a much broader view of what life itself is. Again, death is not the opposite of life; it's the opposite of birth. Birth and death are a cycle. Study the 3,000 realms contained within a moment of life. Tendai. Study Nagarjuna's analysis of the Buddha's real meaning in Anatman. Anatman, just like it sounds. Antaman. Anatman. Did I spell that right? Anyway. Vasubandhu's description of tendencies and conditions, how we are created from tendencies and conditions. All of these are very scholarly and exhaustive analysis of the 12-linked causal chain. Throwing a lot of stuff at you here, but you can handle it. We know today as modern people that every 7 years, every single cell in our body is renewed. That's not that every 7 years we go boom. It takes 7 years for every cell in our body to renew. But you know this is happening because you get dandruff. You know this is happening because you buy exfoliants. You know this is happening because you get scar tissue, because you regrow stuff. Stem cells from our bone marrow, imbued with the patterns and identifiers of our DNA and our genealogy, are programmed to create new cells to replace dying cells. We talk about this like it's average daily occurrence. It is, but we don't necessarily consider that our liver is reconstructed. Our liver may be reconstructed in 3 years completely. Our brain cells are dying all the time. A great argument against drug use. But we're also replacing cells in the brain as well. Are we keeping up with the loss? There's a lot of conditions, tendencies, and conditions for that. So, in a very real way, the person you are now, in a week from now, will not be the same person. Certainly not entirely. Some parts of you will be entirely new. And some parts of you will have sloughed away and gone down the shower drain. Right? It seems obvious in some examples. It's not so obvious in our mind. Our mind is also constructed in this way. The way we think, the way we store things in our brain, and the way we use that storage and reason it out is a separate thing from the organ of the brain. The mind, if you will, is the subject of Buddhism. And retraining that mind is everything. So the secularists, the scientists, the Sam Harrises of the world will consider everything that is known within the expanse of one lifetime and how it's experienced. So, for instance, Sam Harris would point out that thoughts are simply precipitated as a result of our DNA, our genealogy. We can show this because we can show that, as he points out in experiments, if somebody is asked to pick a green ball or a red ball, a scientist hooked up to the brain can look at the brain, see where activity is generated, see that the pre-conscious thought of moving a particular object has already decided seconds before the conscious mind says, okay, the green ball. Which leads Sam Harris and others to postulate that all our thoughts, as original as we think they may be, come from processes that already are extant and determined. So you're just going to do what you're going to do. How much control over that you have is, according to that theory, negligible at best, if at all. I submit to you that the Buddha addressed this very issue. What the Buddha was saying is, if you train your mind to be more and more aware of how your thoughts arise, just a different language about the same thing, if you can catch your thought, look up the monkey mind in Buddhist teachings. This is what the Buddha is talking about. If you can, before you act, be conscious of the idea of how you're acting and why you might even be coming to that conclusion, if you can stop yourself before you act, then there's an opportunity. And the opportunity is to begin to understand and unravel those tendencies and conditions, those underlying pre-conscious thoughts that lead you to make that decision. And even if you can't see that, even if you take the argument, it's pre-conscious. So how can you be conscious of something that's pre-conscious? Okay, that's fine. But what you can do is, if you halt it before you actually take action, if I say, hey, I think I'm going to grab the green ball, and I stop and I go, what if I don't listen to that? What if I take that decision and just go the other way? What will happen? Maybe nothing. Maybe you'll just pick up the red ball and the scientists will go, we couldn't predict. But what Buddha is saying is, you're retraining your mind. You're retraining your mind to not just blindly accept a pattern of behavior, and you're introducing a variant. And if you can become more and more able to introduce variants, then you're going to become more and more aware of the consequences. And perhaps then, as you become more aware of the consequences, you can then make a different decision about how your life works, how your life can function, how you can redirect your life to not go down this cycle that we constantly repeat. I always like the same people. I always get involved with the same girls or the same guys. I always seem to do this with activities I take part in. Why am I so self-destructive? Why do I always alienate this kind of person that I want in my life? Why? Those questions are cycles. And they don't take an actual physical death to experience. Although you could say that the death of hair follicles and skin are actual physical deaths, aren't they? And they're replaced with actual physical cells. So, who's to say? However, I put it to you that when Buddha talks about the cycle of birth and death, he is talking about the birth we experience in each single moment of life. Life is not a straight line, or life is not a continuous line. Life is a series of points, discrete moments of life, followed by other discrete moments of life. So in order to be point to point to point, there is a birth of a point and a death of that point as you instantiate the next point. Leapfrogging. This is life. This is a constant series of births and death. And in each of those moments, we exist in 3,000 realms. This is the Buddhist math, but it illustrates the thought exercise for you to understand that in each moment of mind, you make over 180,000 decisions. Obviously, most of those are preconscious. So if I start to affect, if I start to grab my thought before I act and start redirecting it, I can start to mold and change that direction. That gives a new perspective to the idea of volition, or the much maligned term free will. It's difficult. It is not easy. And this is the ardor of the Buddhist practice. This is everything the Buddhist taught centers around this. Because if you can imagine yourself having that kind of awareness, not completely, even just to 10%, imagine how much less confusion you would feel. Imagine how much less you would suffer about your condition in life. You would just know so much more about where it comes from, and therefore how to avoid it or redirect it. To have 10% more cognitive input into the way your life is moving is mind-blowing. This is what all the Buddha's teaching is about. It's about liberation of the cycle of birth and death, which includes everything that exists is suffering. It's suffering because it's all a result of attachment and desire. But if you begin to understand the mechanisms that move you through these repetitive cycles, you can begin to intervene. That's Buddhist practice. That's the core. Anyway, I thank you for listening. I went a lot longer than I thought I would. Short talk for me. I hope you got something out of this, and I hope, if nothing else, that you have some questions. Put them in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. And again, now I'm looking at my computer so I can turn off the camera. Have a great day.